Well, the writ in British Columbia is expected to drop this Saturday, triggering a 29-day campaign that will see Premier David Eby looking for another term for his BC NDP. Meanwhile, the BC Conservatives, who did not even elect a single MLA in the last election, well, they are in a statistical tie and could be the government-elect come October 19. Well, to help break this down for us, we're now joined by Éric Grenier, polls analyst and the founder of the Writ.ca. Éric, thank you for being here again.
Happy to be here.
So listen, let's begin with Léger, because, they did do a study, and this was from last week, and they found that the BC NDP was at 44%, the Conservatives at 42% among decided voters. That is within the margin of error. So talk to us about how close this race is expected to be.
It is looking like it is going to be very close. We've seen actually a number of polls now over the last week or two, which in every case had the gap between the BC NDP and the BC Conservatives at about 1 or 2 points. And in some of those polls, even the Conservatives were ahead. So this is going to be a very close race with the two parties starting this campaign neck and neck. It is going to depend how that breaks down across the province. We know that the NDP has a lot more support in Metro Vancouver, on Vancouver Island. The Conservatives are very strong in the BC interior and parts of the Fraser Valley. But it is neck and neck, and it wasn't neck and neck just a few months ago. So it just shows how much things have changed in British Columbia.
Yeah, how much things have changed, not only not neck and neck now, but also the fact that there was the BC Liberal Party in the last election, then became BC United. They're gone altogether, throwing their support behind the BC Conservatives. But I wonder, because there is no more BC United in this race, will all that voting then necessarily go to the BC Conservative Party if that is who the leader of the BC United is essentially endorsing?
It seems that over the last few months, as the support for BC United really collapsed, all of the support that BC United was losing was going to the Conservatives. There was this last core of about 10% of voters in British Columbia who were still backing that party when Kevin Falcon more or less folded the operation. And since then, we've seen that it hasn't all gone to the Conservatives, that about half of it has gone to the Conservatives, half of it has gone to the New Democrats. In part, this is because the last people who were sticking with the former BC Liberals weren't all that far to the right. They might have been centrist voters, and some of them have made the choice to go over to the NDP, at least for the time being. So I think that's why this race is as close as it seems to be. It's more or less one party versus another. The Greens have a bit of support as well. And it's just a question of how real this BC Conservative Party is, because it does not have the same resources that the Liberals used to in past campaigns. They only have a handful of incumbent MLAs, all of them former BC United MLAs. It's a bit of a new operation. So how is it going to operate under the pressures of an election campaign? We'll find out. BC NDP certainly knows how to win some elections in that province.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. You mentioned the BC Conservatives not really having the ground game, and that's because, again, this is a party that essentially has found a whole new life in the last couple of years or so. How much of that is because of the BC Conservatives, or about the national support that Conservatives are feeling out of Pierre Poilievre?
I do think that a lot of it can be attributed to Pierre Poilievre. The Conservatives are doing very well in British Columbia, the federal Conservatives, and the rise in support for the BC Conservatives did, in some ways, it correlated with the rise in support for the federal Conservatives. So I think that the branding did help put the BC Conservatives into a position where they could challenge the NDP for the polls, for top spot in the polls, and for the support for the former BC Liberals to collapse. But once the support started to drop for the BC Liberals, it was a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy that some of the donors started going over to the Conservatives. Then some of the MLAs went over to the Conservatives. So now it is the replacement party for BC United, and it has a lot of the same backers, donors, volunteers as the federal Conservatives. It's now just the question of whether they can actually make good on what the polls helped produce, which was that they became the main alternative to the BC NDP.
Okay. Well, beyond the party labels of NDP and Conservative now in British Columbia, talk to us about the key issues. What are they expected to be in this campaign?
I don't think it's going to be all that different from, let's say, the next federal campaign. In that way, it's going to be a really good proxy for the next federal election when it comes around. Housing affordability is an issue across the country. It is an extremely important issue in British Columbia. Crime and the opioid crisis is a big issue in British Columbia as well. We've seen David Eby make some announcements related to that over the last little while, clearly trying to protect himself against attacks from the Conservatives that they've made the province unsafe. So I think those are going to be the two primary issues. The environment is usually a big issue in British Columbia. We've already seen David Eby trying to move away from the carbon tax, the federal carbon tax. So I do think it is going to be largely about pocketbook issues and public safety. And those aren't really good issues for the NDP. And it's one of the reasons why they are a little bit more vulnerable than we might have thought. David Eby is still pretty popular. He still polls pretty well. But is the NDP really going to be able to compete with the Conservatives on some of these issues where the Conservatives tend to do pretty well?
Okay, well, it gets underway this weekend. Éric, always appreciate the time. Thank you for that.
All right, thank you.